Hello, Vianney Griffins, and welcome to this video lecture on the Reformation and the start of the Reformation and its leader, Martin Luther. What I want you to do first is I want you to take a look at this image that we have currently on the screen. It's a very famous image. I want you to take a look. What do you think is going on here? What is happening? Describe your environment if you have an idea about what possibly could be going on here. I want you to write it down. I want you to write it down at the top of your page. Just take a guess. Pause the video and take a guess. All right, this is one of the most famous images in world history. It's the start of the Reformation. The gentleman here in the middle here, that is Martin Luther. And he is actually nailing to the church door a very important document known as the 95 Thesis, something that we'll talk about more here in just a few minutes. The Reformation is actually the second component of this unit. And it's going to help spark the age of exploration here later. The Reformation is kind of a big deal in Europe. It's the time in history when the Catholic Church actually starts to fracture into many different pieces that had once unified all of Europe as one. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that means. Critical questions for you. Here's what the Catholic Church looks like in the 1400s, so right around the time of the Renaissance. The Catholic Church is absolutely at its peak during the 1400s. The Catholic Church is filthy rich. The kings of Europe were really the only people that were the top of the feudal system. However, even the kings of Europe had to answer to the Pope. The whole continent was Catholic, and the entire continent was very, very serious about following Vatican law. So what that essentially means is that the Pope had control over tens of millions of people who all worshipped him as the spokesperson for God himself. The Catholic Church and the Pope is going to use this wealth and power to build elaborate cathedrals and basilicas all across Europe, including the very, very famous Vatican City and its gold basilica in the 1400s. But here's the problem. The Catholic Church was founded on this idea that the poor shall be served in every regard, that the religious should live as the poor do, and we should all try to be closer to God by serving those who are less fortunate. So to have something like the Catholic Church be super wealthy, have all this money, and yet still there to be poor people throughout Europe was kind of a contradiction and something that not a lot of people liked. This is going to lead to many people standing up and saying, you know what, Catholic Church, what you're doing is wrong, and it needs to change. So being rich and being corrupt are probably the two big ideas that is the problems with the Catholic Church. Now let's take a look at some of the smaller components that make up those two big ideas. Here's three of them. Number one, just as we talked about before, as more and more money started to flow into the Catholic Church, it led to more abuses of power, immorality, and overall just a secular movement within the Catholic Church to acquire more and more wealth instead of serve the people. And so reformers didn't like that at all. Problem number two, overall corruption. Sometimes there were instances in which a bishop or a cardinal would take a bribe and allow a lord to be forgiven for sins that a common person would not be forgiven for. And those types of corruption just kind of ate away at the respect that the common people had for the Catholic Church. Number three, monasteries and churches owned a lot of land. Peasants worked on this land, much like we talked about with the feudal system. The church, however, instead of charging lower rent to these peasants because they're trying to serve the people, they're actually requiring higher rent because they are giving the peasants the opportunity to work for the glory of God. And so when the church charged high rent and the peasants couldn't pay it, they were very quick to kick them off their land and make these peasants homeless. Something that, again, you think the Catholic Church wouldn't do that, but they were doing it, and it was causing a lot of people to be very mad with them. Problem number four. Problem number five. Problem number four. While the church is acquiring all this wealth, they're using this wealth to kind of start to show off how wealthy they are. A lot of taxes are going to be paid to the Catholic Church by the peasants. Those taxes are going to help finance Renaissance projects that we talked about in our last lectures. And those Renaissance projects are going to be pretty much strictly for the bishops and the cardinals and the priests, and the common people are really never going to be able to experience them. Something that's very troubling. Number five is one of my favorites, fake relics. The Pope and the cardinals are going to issue licenses to what are known as pardoners all throughout Europe in order to raise even more money to build things like Vatican City. The Pope actually allowed people to go around and sell relics. Now, if you don't know what a relic is, it's pretty simple. A relic is a holy item. So it could have been the spear that pierced Jesus' side. It could have been the nails that nailed him to the cross. It could be a bone from a saint, or the staff or walking stick that a saint used. Those items have special spiritual powers that churches rely on. These relics are often placed in new churches as kind of becoming the spiritual center. Well, what these fake pardoners were doing is they were creating, they were making up relics and then selling them to people for a lot of money. And people quickly realized that some of these things are fake when they started realizing that multiple people had, for instance, the staff of this saint or something like that. And so it really started to collapse on them very quickly. The last problem with the Catholic Church that caused the most problems for the Catholic Church in the long run is known as indulgences. This is the most important point. Indulgences were pardons issued by the Pope that people could purchase to reduce the soul's time in purgatory. In order to help finance Vatican City, the Pope signed pardons that people could purchase that allow them to get into heaven faster than people that don't have pardons. So again, these are pieces of paper bought by people for a lot of money that allows them to get into heaven first over poor people. I want you to think about that over the next day. Think about what that means and why that's wrong in a Catholic environment. And we'll talk about it in class. What you should know is, though, that these indulgences were a huge concern, mostly because people had just realized that the Catholic Church was more interested in acquiring money than serving the people. And so this was kind of the last straw for a lot of people. And after the indulgences, people started outright protest against the Catholic Church. One of those people that is going to be a main pusher for reform within the Catholic Church, essentially trying to eliminate a lot of these things that I just talked about, is a man by the name of Martin Luther. Now, I call Martin Luther a nobody because Martin Luther is really, in the grand scheme of European history, he is a nobody. He was not a king. He was not a noble. He was not a pope. He was a simple monk and priest from Germany. But what he's going to do as a nobody is he's going to help change the fate of Europe for the long term. The way he's going to do it is that he's going to write something known as the 95 Theses. The 95 Theses were 95 separate complaints that Martin Luther had that helped identify what the big problems were in the Catholic Church. Many people agreed with Martin Luther, and he's going to start what's known as the Protestant Reformation for that. At this time, I do need to stop the video and start a new one. I will be right back in just 1 second.